Hello, Snorfs. About a week ago, we finally saw the reveal of the FNaF chapter for Dead by Daylight, and with it, the playable PTB. Overall, I love what we're seeing. Springtrap seems super balanced and fun, his door mechanic is super cool and authentic to the FNaF series, and the map is a really neat reimagining of the Pizzeria from the first game. However, I can't deny that there are some things I think could be better in terms of representing FNaF in this Hall of Fame of Horror, as it calls itself. These things I wouldn't call disappointing, but I would call them off-putting. Again, I am very happy with what we've seen, I just think it could be a little bit cooler, and that's what we'll be talking about today. Let me start by saying that the things I will be talking about today are changes that can be made to what we already have, not additions of new things that we don't have. We could talk all day about how we wish Michael Afton was a survivor, or that Fazer's Fright was also in the map, or so on and so forth. Those things wouldn't be reasonable to suggest at this point in development, and honestly, any new additions like that would probably have to wait for a second FNaF chapter later down the line, which I may also be talking about at a later date. But let's get into the specifics. Let's start with Springtrap himself. Visually and mechanically, I think he's great. I love how they adapted him to fit DBD's art style, albeit he could have his belly patch and button re-added. But that's just a nitpick. Mechanically, as I said, I think his security door mechanic is really neat, and a cool way to add an authentic fast travel to the character's power. And heck, I think the fact he's a projectile killer is also super neat. FNaF is a game about claustrophobia, and by giving him a projectile that he can hold out with little slowdown, gives some amazing zoning potential. That's to say, even when he's on the move, he can make his victims claustrophobic by zoning out their options. However, the choice of projectile is where I start to raise an eyebrow. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or I guess the fire axe in this case. If I were to guess, what happened is early on in discussions about his power, Scott himself mentioned how he's seen plenty of fans talk about giving Springtrap an axe in their concepts, and to please fans, he suggested that Springtrap should have an axe in reality. I think as the owner of the series, Scott has more say than anyone about what Springtrap can and can't do, and if he wants to please fans by giving them something they've asked for but has never really been seen in the series, that's his call to make. But as a humble fan, the frustrating thing about this is the fact that this means the Springtrap we have in DBD isn't as good of a representation of the FNaF franchise as he is a fan interpretation of the franchise. An interpretation, mind you, that was controversial even well before it became official in DBD. I think the fix for this is super easy. So easy, in fact, it's almost frustrating to me that this isn't what we already have. Again, mechanically, I don't think that the projectile has to change at all. I just think that it needs to change visually. Specifically, I think the projectile could change to phantoms. Imagine seeing Springtrap walking around the map, and emanating off of his arm are black-green wisps of the phantom animatronics from FNaF 3. Then he spots you, he raises his hand and points at you, and with that point comes a screeching phantom launching in your direction. Just like in FNaF 3, getting hit by the phantoms is just the beginning. You still have to deal with the consequences of being scared by one. Once hit, you'd be injured and broken just as you are now, but instead of having to pull an axe out, you need to dispel the phantoms which are now swarming you. Kinda like Ortis birds, for example. I think with this, it would be super neat if the axe icon on the HUD changed to the error text from the maintenance panel in FNaF 3, almost as if by dispelling the phantoms you're fixing a ventilation error of sorts. In terms of the other use cases of the projectile, when you miss, you'd see a greenish wisp at the point it hit the environment, and the fire particles that currently surround the axe would be replaced with more ghostly particles. This could make the killer instinct make even more sense, as if the spirits are pointing out to Springtrap where the survivor is. When hitting a door with the axe, instead of it looking cracked and broken, instead it would look haunted, with the wisp spilling out from around the frame. I think overall this would tie Springtrap back to his roots in 3 much better, and furthermore play into the paranormal vibe of the original FNaF game super well. I mean, think about it. In FNaF 3, Springtrap will often catch you after a phantom or two has already taken your attention with jump scares and errors. With this concept, whenever phantoms are literally swarming the survivor, Springtrap could physically walk up and grab them. When I thought this idea through, I was almost pulling my hair out thinking how perfect this would be to represent Springtrap. And at this point, I'm almost convinced this is what it was at first until someone suggested they please fans by giving him an axe instead. I should probably stop yelling about this, but now there is a secondary problem with Springtrap's power. This one isn't aesthetic, but rather mechanical. As of now, there really isn't a big reason for survivors to use the cameras, which ironically is actually super faithful to the first couple of FNaF games, where watching the cameras wasn't all that useful. But to encourage survivors to use them more, I think that we could take inspiration from the game, where looking at cameras is actually important. Vital, in fact. And of course I'm once again talking about FNaF 3, fittingly the game Springtrap came from. There's two big features in the cameras in 3 that make their usage vital to your survival, both of which I think could be implemented in the current door system we already have. The first is the audio lure. Right now there's a bit of a secret feature of Springtrap's power where if a survivor has entered a security door, that door will turn yellow for him if he's looking at the security system. I think we could expand upon this a little more and have it so whenever a survivor exits a security door, he gets killer instinct on that door's location. Alongside this, of course, would come the audio lure I was discussing. The way this would work is in the camera, survivors could press like F or something when looking at a camera to put a lure at that door. This lure would drain a bit of power, but would cause that door to turn yellow for Springtrap if he's in the security system, and would also give killer instinct at that door as if a survivor has just exited it. I do admit though, this feature would still leave the doors a bit gimmicky and probably still wouldn't warrant survivors using the cameras. For a much more important feature, we can look at another vital feature using cams in 3, and that is sealing the vents. Locking doors is a feature that has been core to FNaF since the first game, so the fact survivors can't lock the doors already is a little crazy. The way this would work is when looking through a camera, survivors could press a seal door button. This would play a short animation and sound effect similar to the vent seal process in 3 before the door is fully sealed. Sealed doors cannot be exited by survivors or Springtrap, nor can they be entered by him. Only one door can be sealed at a time, just like in 3, and when the power goes out, any sealed door becomes unsealed until the power comes back online. This would add an interesting element to playing against Springtrap, where someone could actually try to keep their eyes on him as frequently as possible. This would add an interesting element to playing against Springtrap, where someone could actually try to keep their eyes on him as frequently as possible in order to cut him off from fast traveling. Furthermore, it would make managing power actually important. That covers the mechanical side of things. There are a couple other aesthetic things I'd want to see changed, such as the power icon on the menu and hint screen being changed to the grab icon, just to visually represent Springtrap a little better. And also an extension to the lore where he's taken after 3 or 6 would be neat. I'll put my take on it on screen right now if you want to read it, but it's basically my attempt at explaining the acts, while also adding a bit more intrigue to Springtrap's entry into the realm. The other thing I wanted to briefly cover was the map. Honestly, I really like the pizzeria we have. I think it solves a lot of the problems the original FNaF building had, namely by adding key locations to a functional pizzeria like an arcade, a loading dock, and most importantly, an actual entrance to the building. Yeah, and one, it isn't exactly clear how anyone gets into or out of this place, so them adding a reception similar to the entrance in the movie was really neat. Also, the pizzeria in 1 isn't decorated super interestingly, but this map changes that by making it super colorful and authentic to a real-world pizzeria. I do think the outside could use some work, as of now, it really just reuses assets from the movie theater map. I mean, the seats of the theater are actively floating around the edges, even though that asset doesn't appear in Freddy's. I mean, Greenville and Garden of Joy have different colored skies despite being in the same realm, so why not make the sky over Freddy's purple or something? Change the floating objects around the edges to things like endoskeletons, mascot heads, pizza boxes, and the like. As for the interior, which I know I already said I like, there are a couple problems I have with it. Namely, in adding some key rooms to the building, they also removed some important rooms in the process. Namely, the security office, the second bathroom, and the safe room. Okay, technically there is a security office, but it's crammed into the parts and service room for some reason, which, for arguably the most iconic room in all FNaF, seems like a disservice. So here's my proposed layout change. On the left you can see my rough recreation of the map we have, not to scale of course as I'm making this after the PTB has gone offline. On the right you can see my modified layout with a couple key changes. I'll walk you through my process of modifying the layout. First, I rotated the arcade 90 degrees and squeezed it a little bit so that its back wall was flush with the backstage's back wall, and so that its right wall was flush with the bathroom. Then I changed the bathroom to a layout more similar to the one in 1, where the bathrooms themselves are first connected by a hallway separate from the main showroom. I also messed with the scales a little bit to fit them in more naturally. Then I added the safe room to the far end of the hall, the same place where it is in FNaF 3's minigames. Then I modified the front entrance. I brought reception down a little bit and in the empty space added a security office. I then extended the walls of the main room down a little bit so the left wall that runs past the supply closet goes a little further down and then turns into the security office, just like the west hall in FNaF 1. Then the right hall that runs past the kitchen I brought down to run past the office and connect to reception, and again here's the final result. It was surprisingly easy to do, and I think this layout would be a much neater representation of the original pizzeria. Obviously actually doing this would be much harder as environment creation isn't as easy as making rectangles in a designer app. And in fact I think they've gone on record to say map creation is the most expensive thing that they do, but maybe at some point something like this could happen to really capture the first game super well. And that about covers it. Let me know what you think about the FNaF chapter in the comments, and if you think my suggested changes are any good. I hope to be back in a couple weeks when the FNaF chapter drops to do some videos on it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.